The city of Townsville! A peaceful place filled with friendly citizens saying hi to each other as they pass on the street. Children playing in the park without a care in the world. And home to everyone's favorite little superheroes, the Powerpuff Girls. Sugar, spice, and everything nice. These were the ingredients chosen to create the perfect little girls. But Professor Utonium accidentally added an extra ingredient to the concoction. Chemical X! Thus, the Powerpuff Girls were born! Using their ultra superpowers, Blossum, Bubbles, and Buttercup have dedicated their lives to fighting crime and the forces of evil! Innocent Bubbles, the sweet, cheerful lass with blonde pigtails, was playing with her stuffed animals, lost in her own imaginary world. A teddy bear was currently going to the grocery store to buy honey, but is stopped by a bunny rabbit who claimed to be an old friend. The rough yet loyal Buttercup liked to spend her time hitting and kicking her punching bag, working as hard as she could to improve her strength. She liked power and had lots of it, but it just never seemed to be enough. Despite her tough nature and spicy attitude, she was still just as sweet as the other two. Last, there was Blossum, the leader, sitting on their bed and reading a rather large book on biology. She would study highly advanced subjects, not for school, but for fun, as she enjoyed intellectual stimulation. Blossum was incredibly smart, and was still only in kindergarten. The girls were wrenched out of their own little world by the buzz of the hotline, which was wont to mean trouble. Blossom flashed over to it, immediately accompanied by her sisters, and picked up the receiver. "Yes, Mayor?" she said urgently. "Powerpuff Girls!" exclaimed the mayor of Townsville on the other end. "Mojo Jojo has built a huge missile launcher thing and is pointed straight at the city! He's controlling it from his lair! Oh, please help!" "We're on it, Mayor!" Blossom exclaimed before hanging up the phone. She turned to her sisters. "Mojo is at it again, girls! Let's go!" Without hesitation, they zoomed out of their bedroom windows and flew toward the volcano, which on top held the lair of Mojo Jojo. Mojo Jojo was one of the more notorious criminals that wreaked havoc on the city, and often came as a challenge to the girls, for he had the advantage of enhanced brain power and technology on his side. It was pretty impressive seeing as how he was a monkey, but just like the girls, he had been exposed to Chemical X. "Not so fast, Mojo Jojo!" Blossom cried as the girls crashed through the roof. Mojo was sitting at a control panel for the missile launcher and was about to fire, but the arrival of the girls caught his attention.
Wah!
He laughed evilly.
"You cannot stop me this time, girls! For you see, I am over here, and you are over there! This is a problem for you because the button to launch the missile is over here! But I am the one who has the button, which is over here! And you are still over there! Ha 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 ha!"
Without warning, Buttercup darted toward Mojo and clocked him right in the face. However, before he fell out of his chair, he managed to hit the red button, which said LAUNCH on it. "No!" Buttercup shouted, but Bubbles was 2 steps ahead. She shot back outside the lair, and the missile was about to fire, but with a mighty kick, Bubbles spun the launcher up toward the sky instead. Then, with a deafening, the giant rocket flew out into space. When Bubbles returned to the fight, she saw that her sisters had it pretty under control. Buttercup socked Mojo in the face a few more times, and then Blossom came around to kick him in the stomach, causing him to fly backward and onto the floor. The helmet on his head was cracked a little bit, so part of his brain was exposed. "Well, Mojo," said Buttercup confidently, her hands on her hips as she stared down at the monkey, "had enough?" To all 3 of the girls' surprise, Mojo started laughing again.
Ha ha! Surely you did not think that I didn't think of a backup plan?
He cackled.
For I knew that you would try to stop me, so I thought of a clever backup plan to back me up if my first plan failed, which it did! But you did not think I would have thought about such an ingenious plan!
"Okay, well, what is it?" asked Blossom impatiently. Mojo Jojo whipped out of control with a red button on it that said, "Launch again!" "That's it!" Buttercup scoffed.
"I aim the missile at the sky!"
added Bubbles in her cute little voice.
"Oh, this is not for that missile launcher!"
Mojo exclaimed, and he pressed the button, revealing a secondary cannon at the base of the first.
"With this, I will finally destroy the Powerpuff Girls! That is to say, you! You will be the ones who are destroyed, for you are the Powerpuff Girls!"
"Buttercup, destroy the cannon!" Blossom shouted quickly. "Bubbles, get ready to redirect the missile if it launches!" They all split up, Buttercup pounding away at the machine, and Bubbles eyeing the head of the missile carefully, prepared to intercept it. Blossom was fighting Mojo again, for he had yet another backup plan. This time, the red button was on the wall, and it said, "Launch once more!" Mojo was scrambling to get to this third button, but Blossom had a hold on his cape, tugging him back. There was a huge explosion, and the entire missile launcher crumbled to pieces, the missile itself detonating inside the cannon and worsening the machine's damage. Bubbles and Buttercup turned to watch Blossom, who had lost grip on Mojo's cape. Though his machine was destroyed, he desperately clambered to the button, perhaps to engage a completely separate launcher, but Blossom was determined to stop him. She shot toward him, intending to hit him in the back to throw him to the floor again. There was a soft, squishy thump, and then complete and utter silence. Blossom panted slightly, a little disorientated, but then suddenly noticed something peculiar about her arms. Long, shiny steel blades were protruding out of the skin on her forearms. They were extremely sharp and were currently covered in blood. Shocked, she looked down at herself and saw that her pink dress was now wet and a deep crimson. Bubbles screamed bloody murder and then began to sob hysterically. Buttercup's green eyes were wide as she stared at Mojo Jojo's motionless body. Blossom slowly turned to see what had happened, and her heart stopped at the sight. Mojo's eyes, still open, were listless, his mouth slightly agape, and his arms bent at odd angles. The most shocking part, though, was the fact that his lower body seemed to be missing. Mojo had been completely torn in half. Trembling in terror, Blossom's eyes found the lower half lying about a foot away, the intestines spilling out haphazardly. The amount of blood that covered the floor was immense. Blossom stepped forward, her lip trembling and eyes brimming with tears. "Mojo?" she squeaked. Maybe this was just a cruel joke Mojo was playing on them. There was no way he could be dead. "Mojo?" Bubbles cried harder, curling up into a little ball on the floor, and Buttercup remained frozen to the spot, unable to tear her gaze away. At last, Blossom came to the full realization of what she had done, and she dropped to her knees, sobbing and staring at the odd blades coming out of her arms. What were they? How did they get there? "What did you do?" Buttercup finally screamed, tears running down her face as well. It was an accident!" Blossom shrieked, holding up her arms. "I didn't know I could do that! He didn't mean to! What the heck are those? I don't know!" With a great amount of concentration, she managed to retract the blades, which looked as though they were much too big to fit inside her arms. When they had been concealed, there was no sign of damage to her skin. Blossom was still crying as she knelt in a large puddle of blood. "We have to tell someone!" Bubbles squeaked. "We have to tell the mayor!" "No!" Blossom shot, and she got back to her feet, staggering from the lightheadedness the terror had given her. "We can't tell anyone! We just can't! Blossom, we're supposed to protect people! We're not killers!" Buttercup shouted. We've killed monsters!" She tried to reason. "Mojo was not a monster! Mojo was just as much as a person as we are! This isn't an act of justice! This is a crime! We need to tell the mayor what happened! But they'll lock us away! If we just explain it was an accident... Shut up!" Buttercup fell silent, but Bubbles was still wailing. "Bubbles, stop crying!" Trembling uncontrollably, Bubbles covered her mouth and stared at her blood-drenched sister. Blossom began to pace, her shoes making sounds when coming in contact with the wet floor. He was a criminal. Maybe no one will notice that he's missing. "Blossom, that's not right!" Buttercup exclaimed, but Blossom rounded on her again. "You're not telling!" However, Bubbles shot through the ceiling where they had broken through, and Blossom yelled, "Stop her, Buttercup!" Though she wanted to disobey, Buttercup went after Bubbles and grabbed her around the waist. "Let me go!" she shrieked, tears still streaming down her face. "I have to tell!" "Wait!" Buttercup hissed. We need to come up with a plan." This calmed Bubbles down a bit, and the two of them flew back down to Mojo's lair. Blossom was staring at the body, horror still plain on her face. Then she held up her arms and brought the blades back out, staring at them in confusion. "What's happened to me?" she muttered. "Why do you always get the new powers?" Buttercup snapped, but Blossom glared at her. "That's not the issue here!" The strange weapons retracted once more, and she looked solemnly back into the lifeless face of their foe. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Blossom, said Buttercup gently, we need to tell the mayor. Blossom was quiet for a moment, and then she looked right into Buttercup's eyes. Grab his lower half, and I'll get the upper part. We're throwing the body into the volcano. What? Bubbles and Buttercup exclaimed in unison. Don't question me! Just do it! Buttercup begrudgingly approached Mojo's legs, trying not to vomit as she saw the innards strewn across the floor. With a light sob, she picked it up, and her and Blossom flew outside to drop the corpse into the lava. Bubbles curled up on the floor again, staring wide-eyed at the still bloody floor. When Blossom and Buttercup returned, they both were silent, Blossom's eyes wide with fear, and Buttercup wiping her tears away, succeeding in staining her face with the blood on her hands. Bubbles looked at them.
What are we going to do?
She murmured. Just then, Buttercup looked at Blossom and cringed. Blossom saw this and furrowed her brow. What? She asked, and Buttercup shakily pointed to the top of her head. Blossom curiously felt her head and touched something moist and squishy. Grabbing it, she looked at the thing and suddenly shrieked, throwing it to the floor. It was a small chunk of flesh. Blossom covered her face and cried. We should at least tell the professor, Buttercup suggested, once again holding back the urge to throw up. Blossom shook her head. We're not telling anyone. She shot them both a glare. Do you understand? Neither of you are to tell a soul!
But, Blossom!
Argued Bubbles, but Blossom held up her hand to silence her. Okay, well, will you agree to tell the professor about your new ability? Asked Buttercup gingerly. You have to admit, 2 giant shards of metal ripping through your skin isn't normal, even for us. Blossom nodded sadly, bowing her head, her messy red hair falling over her face.
You both are covered in...
Bubbles didn't want to say the word, but the other two knew what she meant, and it was true. Since Buttercup had helped dispose of Mojo's body, she had gotten blood all over herself, too. We can't go home looking like this, said Blossom, gripping a chunk of her hair and examining it, for it too had traces of the undesired substance. Well, this is Mojo's home, said Buttercup. He has a bath and a washing machine. We'll just clean up here. Seems kind of tactless, Blossom muttered. We don't have a choice. They both nodded, and then Blossom approached Bubbles, holding out her hand to help her up. Bubbles whimpered at the blood on her skin, but allowed her to assist her anyway. While Blossom and Buttercup began cleaning up the gore still left in the middle of the room, Bubbles found the bathroom and started the bath. She saw a yellow rubber ducky sitting next to the soap, and her lip trembled again. She covered her eyes as she waited for the bath to fill. In a short time, the other two had thrown their dresses, stockings, undergarments, and Blossom's bow into the washing machine, and then joined Bubbles. All 3 of them dismally sat in the warm water, Bubbles holding the duck to her chest as if it was the last thing left in the world. Blossom was silently crying, trying not to pay attention to the bath water turning a dull maroon color. Buttercup herself actually kept her eyes closed. You guys know I didn't mean it, right? Blossom asked quickly, turning to her sisters, who nodded.
Of course,
said Bubbles softly.
But that's why we need to turn ourselves in.
No, Bubbles, Blossom insisted, though her voice wavered. Let's just wait until the professor can get rid of these things. She looked to her arms where the blades would come out, which she now could control. She was thankful for this. Hopefully there would be no more accidents. Once they were clean, Buttercup retrieved their clothes, but the stains hadn't come all the way out. In fact, their stockings had entirely turned a light brown. Oh no, she said, showing Blossom the dresses. Luckily, Bubbles hadn't needed to wash her dress or stockings, or they would have gotten tainted as well. The green and pink dresses now had brownish spots, though they looked more like mud. We'll just say we got dirty, suggested Blossom, and then she inspected her stockings. These are ruined, though. We'll just change when we get home, said Buttercup, pulling on her clothes, but ignoring her own stockings. The other two got dressed as well, and then slowly floated into the room with the destroyed machine. It alone was a painful sight. After tying her bow back into her hair, Blossom gestured for her sisters to follow her, and they flew back home.
Hi, girls,
said Professor Utonium jovially, as the girls floated through the door. All 3 of them tried not to look guilty, Bubbles struggling with the urge to start crying again.
Oh my, you got your clothes all dirty.
Rough fight, Blossom choked out.
Well, how about you 3 go change, and I'll get those stains out for you,
he suggested. Blossom and Buttercup exchanged looks, and then the three of them flew to their room.
He won't realize what the stains are, right?
Asked Blossom softly as she pulled on a clean dress and stockings.
I don't know,
Buttercup replied. Bubbles watched them, holding her stuffed animal octopus as tightly as she had held Mojo Jojo's rubber ducky. They went back downstairs to give the professor their laundry, and then sat on the couch to watch cartoons, Bubbles still clinging to Octi. They hoped that maybe television would help keep their minds off of the tragedy. Professor Utonium was about to throw the dresses into the washing machine with some stain remover, but something about the stains caught his eye. He rubbed at one on Blossom's dress, but only felt fabric. It was not dirt. In fact, it looked like... Curious, the professor took the dress down to his lab and thoroughly inspected the stain. To his surprise and mild horror, he found his suspicion was confirmed. He knew that the girls' fights would get quite intense sometimes, but they've never come home covered in blood before. If anything, it was usually some kind of slime or mucus.
Hey, girls?
He said when he came back up from his lab.
Who did you fight today?
Mojo Jojo,
said Buttercup, and when they turned to look at him, they were horrified to see him holding up the pink dress.
What on earth happened to cause this?
He asked, pointing to the brown stains.
Well, you know, he's violent,
Blossom said in a squeak.
But this is a lot of blood,
said the professor.
Are you three all right? Are you hurt?
We're fine,
Blossom and Buttercup choked, but Bubbles' lip was trembling, and the professor noticed this.
Bubbles, what happened?
Before the other two could stop her, she started sobbing again.
Blossom killed Mojo!
She wailed.
Bubbles!
Blossom gasped, but when she noticed the professor's expression, she began to panic. He was pale, staring at Blossom with confused terror, unsure of what to say or do. Her desperation and fear overcame rationality, and in less than a second, she had shot at the professor and shoved him to the floor.
What are you doing?
Buttercup shouted, and she attempted to apprehend Blossom, who was crying now.
No one can know!
She sobbed, struggling against Buttercup's hold. Professor Utonium never took his eyes off of the two of them, specifically Blossom. He couldn't believe that his sweet little girl could have taken a life, even that of a criminal. Bubbles stayed on the couch, watching the scene and continuing to sob.
He can help us!
Buttercup pleaded with Blossom.
He can fix you! If we don't get help, we'll make things worse!
Blossom noticed the professor start to get up, intending to run and call for help, and she once again acted without thinking. Pushing past Buttercup, Blossom slashed the professor's leg with one of her blades. He yelled in agony, as his leg was actually severed below the knee.
Professor!
Bubbles and Buttercup shouted.
Blossom, what are you doing?
Buttercup bellowed at her sister, who still cried as she watched the man bleeding on the floor.
He's going to tell! We have to keep him here!
She replied hysterically.
So you chop off his leg?
Buttercup smacked Blossom across the face.
He is our father! He can help! Why would you do that? I panicked!
Buttercup!
The professor suddenly gasped, tears running down his own face. Buttercup gave Blossom a violently hostile look, and then descended to the floor to help him.
It's okay,
she said, but was mostly trying to convince herself.
It'll be okay. We'll be okay.
Buttercup had gone to hug him, but just as her arms wrapped over his shoulders, there was a horrific squelch, and blood splashed on her face. Eyes wide, Buttercup froze, and there was a long silence before Bubbles shrieked again.
Professor, no!
Afraid of what she was about to see, Buttercup lifted her head. The professor had been decapitated.
What?
She stammered, backing away from the body, but suddenly noticed what had caused the death of her father figure. On both the front and underside of her forearms, a large rounded blade had emerged, making both arms look like double-sided axes. Blossom had her mouth covered, looking between the headless man and her sister, vision blurred from tears.
What's happening? I'm next!
Bubbles screamed.
I don't want to hurt anyone! I don't want to kill anyone!
Buttercup shot into the air, glaring daggers at Blossom.
This is your fault!
She shrieked.
My fault?
Blossom yelled back.
How is this my fault? I didn't cut off his head. You cut off his leg. If you had just kept calm, he wouldn't have been hurt in the first place. He was asking too many questions. So what? You're going to attack anyone who asks a question? We're not criminals, Blossom.
Buttercup held out her arms to show her new weapon.
He could have prevented this. He could have fixed you. No! If you'd have just agreed to tell someone about Mojo, the professor wouldn't be dead!
Bubbles continued to wail, covering her face with Octi.
Bubbles, stop crying!
Blossom bellowed, and Bubbles stifled her sobs. Blossom looked to the professor's body, and she herself had to keep from screaming in despair.
Blossom, we have to tell,
said Buttercup firmly.
Bubbles is right. This has happened to both of us now, so it's probably going to happen to her too. At this point, I don't care if we go to prison for the rest of our lives. I can't live with the guilt. In one day, 2 people have been killed, and both of them were responsible for our birth. Don't you remember the story about Mojo Jojo pushing the professor while he worked? And it gave Mojo his increased brain power too. Yeah, well, if it wasn't for Mojo Jojo, we wouldn't have blades sticking out of our arms because we wouldn't have powers in the first place,
said Blossom.
That's not the point!
Buttercup was trying her best not to look at the professor's body. She sighed, managing to retract her blades.
I don't care what you say. Bubbles and I are going to tell the mayor what has happened today.
Do you love me? Asked Blossom softly, and Buttercup met her pink eyes.
Of course I do. I love you and Bubbles.
Then please do as I say. The room went silent, save for Bubbles sniffling.
Blossom,
Buttercup pleaded after a moment. We need to clean this up, Blossom said firmly, trying to keep calm. Girls, help me take the professor down to the lab. We need to destroy the body. We can use our heat vision.
No!
Bubbles cried angrily, wiping her tears.
We need to bury him! It'd be wrong not to give him a proper burial!
If we bury him, his body could be found, Blossom argued. We need to get rid of the evidence.
I'm not going to help you do that!
Fine! Buttercup, you help me! Bubbles, clean the mess up here! Buttercup hesitated, her lip trembling. Buttercup, help me! Feeling more miserable than she had in her entire life, Buttercup assisted Blossom by carrying the professor's head. She tried her best to tell herself it was nothing but a simple, wet basketball. Bubbles watched them go, and then sadly went to the kitchen, not even bothering to fly. She returned to the crime scene with many different cleaning supplies, staring at the huge amount of blood on the carpet. There was no way she'd be able to clean it up. She didn't even want to. As she bent down to wipe the area with a towel, her hands shook, and her vision became blurry with more tears. She couldn't do it. Bubbles collapsed into the crimson puddle and sobbed, curled up in a ball on her side. She didn't care that she was now bloody as well. She just wanted the nightmare to end. When her sisters came back up, both looking extremely solemn, they noticed Bubbles laying on the floor. What are you doing? Blossom spat. Why is this not cleaned up yet?
I can't!
Bubbles squeaked, shaking as if she was freezing cold. Then just go up to the room and we'll take care of it. Bubbles did what she was told without arguing, entering their colorful and happy-looking bedroom. She realized she hadn't smiled since before they left to stop Mojo Jojo, and even as she hugged another one of her stuffed animals, she continued to frown. She sat on the end of the bed, blood on her dress staining the blanket, and stared at the hotline. Bubbles contemplated calling the mayor, but she was afraid that Blossom would get mad. Why was this happening to them? When was she going to accidentally take someone's life with the arrival of their new ability?
I don't want to be a killer,
she told the dolphin she was holding, her eyes stinging from the amount of crying she's done for the past few hours.
I'd rather be in jail than hurt anyone.
By the time Blossom and Buttercup managed to get a majority of the blood cleaned up, it had gotten dark. The girls entered the room to see Bubbles beneath the blanket, fast asleep. They were exhausted too, so they got into bed as well. Maybe we'll wake up, and this will all have been a nightmare, Blossom whispered, and Buttercup sniffled, laying down without a retort. Still trying not to break out into more tears, Blossom lay her head on her pillow, closing her eyes and falling asleep. Called a soft voice. Blossom's eyes opened slowly, looking around for whoever was calling her name. She gasped as she saw a swirling red portal on the opposite wall. Blossom, come here. Though she was frightened, Blossom carefully rose into the air, floating over to the vortex. Who's there? She whispered. Blossom, come here, the voice repeated. She hesitated, but then entered the portal. She found herself standing on a cliff, and surrounding her was boiling lava and flickering flames, which reached into pitch-black nothingness that should have been the sky. Blossom was frightened, holding herself for comfort.
Hello?
She called, but recoiled as a burst of flame shot up right in front of her, revealing a tall, thin figure with red skin. The androgynous man grinned down at Blossom, a smile all too familiar to her.
Him?
Hello there, little Blossom,
said him in his eerie, high-pitched voice.
You sure have been having some fun lately, haven't you?
Blossom's expression became angry, and she whipped out her blades, holding them up for him to see.
Did you do this to me?
She screamed, tears running down her cheeks. Him laughed, and a comfy armchair appeared out of thin air behind him. He sat down and crossed his legs in a feminine way, eyeing the Powerpuff Girl curiously.
Why, no, I did not,
he replied.
Though I'd love to shake the hand of whoever did do it. Rather clever, don't you think?
No!
Blossom yelled.
I killed Mojo Jojo, and Buttercup killed the professor. We think Bubbles is next to get this power.
Most likely,
said him apathetically.
But who knows? Maybe hers will be slow and harmless, just like she is.
If you're not doing this, then why am I here?
Blossom demanded.
I just wanted to see how you were holding up, that's all. Your first time is always the most vivid.
She dropped to her knees and sobbed gently, retracting the steel blade so that she could cover her face.
I don't want to hurt anyone. I didn't mean to. I didn't want this.
Aw, don't be sad,
him cooed, standing and kneeling in front of Blossom, touching her chin to make her look up at him.
Everyone has to grow up eventually, even sweet little girls like you. It's a shame, I know, but we have to accept the changes that come with getting older.
Do you really think this has something to do with aging?
Blossom spat, smacking his claw away.
It's possible. Of course, I wouldn't know for sure. The professor thought he would have.
Him cackled.
Such a shame that he's dead.
Stop patronizing me!
Blossom shouted.
You misunderstand me. I'm on your side, but your sisters aren't.
Him suddenly teleported behind Blossom, and she whipped around to face him, terrified.
Bubbles and Buttercup, bless their hearts, want to turn you in. They don't care about your feelings at all.
That's not true!
Blossom cried desperately.
Then why don't they do what you say? Aren't you the leader?
She was silent for a moment, lost in thought.
Just like you said to Buttercup, if they loved you, they'd obey you. It's your job to
keep them in line.
His last 4 words were spoken in a low and harsh tone, making Blossom flinch.
That wouldn't be fair,
she mumbled.
Fine, don't take my advice,
said him sweetly.
But be prepared to join me.
Now!
Blossom screamed as she was engulfed in flames, but a second later, she found herself on her bedroom floor, panting and covered in sweat. After a moment of sitting there regaining her composure, she decided that she wouldn't be able to get back to sleep, so she went back downstairs. When Bubbles and Buttercup woke early the next morning, they were worried to see Blossom missing. They flew downstairs to look for her, trying to ignore the light brown stain on the living room carpet, and found her in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table with a mug in front of her, and her eyes were wide as she stared off into space.
Blossom?
Buttercup said tentatively. Blossom's eyes snapped onto her sister's, and she smiled, which unnerved them a bit.
Good morning!
She said, her voice a higher pitch than usual.
It's a wonderful morning! I'm looking forward to seeing all of our friends at school today! Blossom, is that coffee?
Asked Bubbles, hovering over to look inside the mug.
Yeah!
She exclaimed, her eye twitching.
Great stuff! I'm ready for the day! Yep, nothing will go wrong today! Didn't you sleep last night?
Said Buttercup, alarmed at her manic behavior.
Nope, I couldn't sleep, so I came down to watch TV, and then I was like, hey, I'm hungry! And then I saw the coffee, and I figured that I'd be too sleepy for school, so I made the coffee. How many cups have you had?
Asked Bubbles slowly.
I don't know, I lost count!
Her sisters exchanged furtive looks, their concern escalating.
Maybe you should stay home today,
Bubbles suggested.
Oh no, I couldn't do that. I haven't missed a day this semester. Miss Keene would be so disappointed in me,
replied Blossom, still smiling that strange smile.
But Blossom,
said Buttercup, but Blossom interrupted.
I'm going to school!
She shouted, and the other two flinched.
I'm going to school, and I will have a good day! Don't argue with me!
Though afraid of how Blossom was acting, Bubbles and Buttercup started to get ready for school, not feeling hungry enough to eat breakfast. It wasn't long before Blossom joined them, now completely silent and no longer smiling. Once dressed, the girls slung their backpacks over their shoulders and left the house. It felt weird to just go to school and act as if nothing had happened the previous day. In fact, if it weren't for the stain on the carpet and absence of the professor, the girls would have genuinely felt like it had been a bad dream. Now the world seemed empty and unrealistic, the tragedy leaving a gaping hole in their hearts. Miss Keene was giving a lecture on subtraction, but none of the girls were listening very hard. Bubbles' lip was trembling, feeling as if there were a golf ball in her throat, trying not to cry. Buttercup slouched in her chair, plagued by a painful headache as she was overcome with depression. Blossom gripped her dress firmly, trembling slightly, giving a tiny twitch every few minutes. The images of Mojo Jojo and the professor's bodies wouldn't leave her mind. Carrying them, destroying them, cleaning up the blood. It was traumatizing, and no little girl as young as her deserved to witness, let alone experience, such horrid events. Nevertheless, her stomach churned in anticipation, as though she was waiting for something exciting to happen. There was so much blood. So much blood.
Miss Keene!
Blossom suddenly squeaked, thrusting her right arm into the air. The teacher turned her attention to Blossom, and was shocked to see how pale and sickly she looked.
Yes, Blossom? I don't feel well. Can I go home?
Bubbles and Buttercup stared at her, but were relieved that she was finally taking their advice.
Yes, you may,
Miss Keene replied.
I hope you feel better.
Without so much as a goodbye, Blossom was gone in less than a second. Flying far away from Townsville, her eyes fell upon the vast woods and dove down toward the trees. There she simply sat against a trunk and buried her face in her arms, pulling her knees to her chest and crying.
Why is this happening?
She whimpered to herself.
I'm a good person. I help people.
Blossom thought about the professor and felt even more remorse.
I can't believe he's gone. This is all my fault.
A bird squawked as it took flight from a tree branch, and she lifted her head to watch it, her eyes listless. Then she twitched. Slowly getting to her feet, she didn't even bother wiping the dirt off of the back of her dress, and she started, not flying, but walking deeper into the woods. Fuzzy Lumpkins was inside his shabby cabin, sitting on a bale of hay and tuning his banjo. He liked to keep to himself, preferring the comfort of the woods over the hustle and bustle of the city. He hated people, and he got angry whenever someone trespassed on his property. All of a sudden, the wooden front door began to creak open, and his attention was torn away from his instrument. Furrowing his brow, Fuzzy stood up, wondering if the wind had pushed it. However, when it fully opened, he saw a tiny figure standing behind the frame.
Blossom?
Fuzzy growled angrily, huffing and getting ready to hit the Powerpuff Girl. Her blank pink eyes simply stared up at him, and Fuzzy grabbed his gun.
Y'all best getting on your way, or I'll blast your pretty little head right off!
She didn't move.
You got till a count of 3. 1,
Blossom stepped into the cabin.
2,
She closed the door.
3.
Fuzzy froze as 2 extremely sharp blades shot out of the little girl's arms. His eyes widened, staring at her as if she were a ghost. Blossom's eyes began to fill with tears.
I'm sorry,
she mumbled, continuing to approach the fluffy pink creature.
Blossom!
Buttercup called as her and Bubbles flew into the house. School had let out, and the two of them were anxious to see how their sister was doing.
Blossom, you home? Blossom?
Bubbles tried, checking the kitchen.
Maybe she's in her room. I hope she's sleeping. She looked exhausted,
said Buttercup. They flew into the room, but stopped when they saw a figure curled up in a corner, facing away from them. Blossom? Said Buttercup softly, and her and Bubbles slowly floated over to her, landing on the floor behind her.
Are you okay?
Asked Bubbles.
You should be
Bubbles paused, suddenly noticing patches of blood on her arms and in her hair.
Blossom.
He never comes to Townsville, said Blossom in an emotionless, almost inaudible tone. He never goes anywhere. No one will know he's gone. She lifted her hand without facing them, and clutched in it was an antenna that was topped with a gray ball of fuzz. Then she carelessly dropped it on the floor. Buttercup quickly covered Bubbles' mouth as she was about to start sobbing again, for she was afraid that any sudden actions would cause Blossom to flip out. Keeping Bubbles in her arms, she silently rose into the air and backed out of the room, closing the door as quietly as she could. Bubbles was squeaking and whimpering desperately, trying to express her distraught, but Buttercup gestured for her to calm down, even though she was having difficulty staying calm herself. Without making any sounds, they flew out of the house, Buttercup holding Bubbles' hand as she kept her lips shut tight, holding back the urge to cry. At last, the woods came into view, and they descended straight toward Fuzzy Lumpkin's cabin, landing on the porch. They stared at the door fearfully, and Buttercup met Bubbles' eyes. Bubbles quickly shook her head, and Buttercup exhaled, pushing the door open. Bubbles finally started screaming and crying at the sight. What was once a pink, bear-like monster was now nothing but chunks of blood-soaked fur, torn flesh, and stray organs. Unlike the previous day, Buttercup couldn't keep herself from throwing up. She retched, coughing up nothing but bile since she hadn't eaten all day.
Why?
Bubbles shrieked, unable to tear her eyes away from the bloody scene.
She said it had been an accident yesterday! That she didn't mean to do it! Why is she doing this?
I don't think she really meant to do this, Bubbles, said Buttercup, her tone calm even though her entire being was overcome with horror. She slowly pointed to the far wall, and there was a single word written in bloody slashes carved into the wood. Sorry.
I'm scared,
Bubbles whimpered, and Buttercup hugged her tightly, finally starting to cry as well. Me too, Bubbles. Me too. After a few minutes of attempted comfort, the girls exited the cabin, closing the door and sitting on the edge of the porch. They didn't speak to each other, even as Buttercup brought out her axe-like blades to examine them. Finally, she retracted them again and turned to her sister. I don't care what Blossom said, she said firmly. We're going to tell the mayor. This has gone way too far. Killing the professor was going way too far.
But you didn't mean it either,
said Bubbles with a sniffle.
Yeah, but do you think I haven't stopped feeling guilty about it? It was still me who did it, and if things hadn't happened the way it did, it probably could have been someone else. We need to stop this before anyone else gets hurt, and before this happens to you!
Let's go now,
said Bubbles quickly, rising into the air.
Hurry before Blossom has a chance to realize we're gone.
Buttercup nodded, and they flew as fast as they could to the mayor's office. Not even bothering to use the door, the two girls crashed through the window, making the mayor jump so hard he nearly fell off of his chair.
Holy moly, girls!
He exclaimed, adjusting his monocle. Miss Bellum hurried in at that moment, having heard the crash, and urgently came to see what had caused it.
Bubbles! Buttercup!
She said in surprise.
What's wrong? Where's Blossom?
Mayor, Miss Bellum!
Buttercup began as quickly as she could.
Yesterday something weird happened to Blossom while we were fighting Mojo Jojo, and she accidentally killed him.
What?
They both exclaimed in alarm.
These weird sword things came out of her arms and she ended up slashing right through Mojo. She didn't mean to, but no matter how hard we tried to convince her to tell you what happened, she wouldn't do it. She had us throw his body into the volcano because she was afraid of someone finding it.
We wanted to tell someone,
continued Bubbles, still crying.
It was an accident, but Blossom kept saying we couldn't tell anyone. So we went home and the professor started asking us questions and Blossom panicked and attacked him.
And when we tried to help him,
Buttercup choked, trembling with fear at remembering what she had done. She bowed her head and held out her arms, exposing her blades. The mayor and Miss Bellum gasped.
It happened to me, and the professor is dead too.
My God,
whispered Miss Bellum in horror.
We wanted to tell the professor because we thought maybe he could help us figure out what was happening,
said Buttercup.
But Blossom kept saying no. That was before she attacked him. And then she still wouldn't agree to tell, and we destroyed his body too.
We didn't know what to do, so we went to bed, but today she was really weird and was drinking coffee, and when we went to school she left early, and when we came home, she was curled up in a corner covered in blood, and we found out that she killed Fuzzy Lumpkins!
Bubbles cried.
Me and Buttercup went to his cabin, and he was all torn up. It was horrible! I'm so scared! It's going to happen to me next!
I don't care what you do with us!
Buttercup shouted.
Just keep us from causing any more harm! Lock us up or something! I don't want to be a killer!
The girls sobbed hysterically, but Miss Bellum and the mayor were so horrified, neither of them knew what to say or do.
Please help us!
Bubbles pleaded, and finally Miss Bellum knelt down to hug the girls, trying not to touch Buttercup's arms, but once the blades were retracted again, she didn't need to worry.
Oh, girls,
She cooed as the two children continued to sob into her shoulders.
we'll figure this out. We'll get you help.
So, Mojo Jojo, Fuzzy Lumpkins, and Professor Utonium are dead?
Asked the mayor in disbelief.
Yes.
Buttercup replied.
But we need to get Blossom. We need to help her, too.
There were suddenly screams and crashes from outside the room, and the girls broke away from Miss Bellum, all four of them staring at the door in alarm. The ruckus lasted for a mere 3 seconds before there was the most frightening silence any of them had ever heard. Then came slow, light footsteps before the office door slowly opened.
I said, don't tell.
Blossom muttered, her eyes filled with absolute fear. The others' expressions soon matched hers once they took in the entire scene. Behind Blossom, the mayor's employees and guards lay on the floor in their own blood, slashed to pieces. Blossom stood in the doorway, her blades exposed, and holding the head of a blonde woman in her right hand.
Blossom,
Miss Bellum said very kindly and gently.
honey, everything is okay. You're not in trouble.
Jordan!
Said the mayor, but Buttercup quickly flew to him and covered his mouth to shut him up. Blossom was shaking as her wide pink eyes stared unblinkingly at Miss Bellum, who made sure she was kneeling low enough to the floor to remain at her eye level. She didn't want to seem threatening.
We will help you,
She continued, and it was amazing how calm and soothing her voice was.
We love you, and your sisters only came to us because they're scared. You're scared too, right?
Blossom dropped the head and nodded slowly.
Then why don't you put those nasty things away, and we'll help all three of you.
Blossom continued to stare, not moving a muscle except for her trembling. They all watched her anxiously, praying that she'd finally calm down. She didn't. In a flash that was faster than the speed of light, Blossom shot forward and slashed at Miss Bellum, cutting her in half at the waist with one blade and slicing off her head with the other. Bubbles was screaming and crying again, and Buttercup couldn't help but yell in despair as well. The mayor was struggling, and she released him, but as he tried to run, Blossom stepped in front of him, blocking his path.
Blossom, please don't hurt me!
He pleaded, kneeling to the floor and bowing his head. She stared down at him, and then slowly shifted her gaze to Buttercup.
I told you not to tell.
She said calmly.
We had to!
Buttercup argued.
You killed Fuzzy! This has to be stopped!
Don't you love me?
Blossom asked softly.
Yes! That's why we want to help you! If you cared about me even a little,
Said Blossom.
you'd do as I ask. But... kill him. What? Kill the mayor.
Bubbles whimpered, and Buttercup's jaw dropped.
What? No!
She shouted,
I thought I could trust you.
said Blossom, looking back at the cowering mayor.
You're my sister. You're supposed to love me. I do love you!
Buttercup insisted, tears falling from her eyes.
Then do as I say.
Blossom looked back into her sister's green eyes.
Kill him. Blossom!
Do as I say!
The sudden shriek made Buttercup flinch, and Bubbles sobbed even more, rocking back and forth on the floor. The mayor looked at Buttercup quickly, pleading to her with his eyes to spare him. However, even though Buttercup didn't want to, she was too afraid of Blossom to disobey. She landed on the floor and walked up to him, eyes sparkling as she cried. She brought out her blades.
I'm sorry.
She mumbled, and before the mayor could even yell, she beheaded him. Bubbles had been close enough to get sprayed with blood, and her sobbing ceased in an instant. Now she simply remained a ball, her eyes wide as Blossom's had been, completely broken. Buttercup knelt over the mare's torso and hugged it desperately, her sobs uncontrollable, repeating, "I'm sorry," over and over again. Blossom watched, tears in her eyes as well, and she was filled with guilt despite the fact that she had willingly told Buttercup to do it. Just then there were sirens outside, and Blossom jumped, retracting her blades, Buttercup following suit. Buttercup flew over to Bubbles to help her up, but Bubbles wouldn't come out of her ball. Deciding that she didn't have time to argue, she picked up her traumatized sister and followed Blossom out of the building.
Where are we going?
Buttercup called to Blossom as they passed over their house.
They'll find us there,
she replied.
We're going back to Mojo's lair. Won't they look there too?
Asked Buttercup.
They won't think to look there right away.
This was it. They were criminals. Buttercup had tried her hardest to stop this madness, but despite her best efforts, nearly 20 people were dead, 2 of them by her own hand. As she held poor Bubbles, whose eyes had closed, she hoped to the high heavens that this was not going to happen to her, too. The odds did not look good. Landing in the dark lair, it seemed abnormal to not be greeted with an evil cackle and string of repetitive banter. Buttercup tried to make herself apathetic, but it was impossible.
Is Bubbles okay?
Blossom asked softly, walking up to Buttercup, who instinctively took a step away. Blossom furrowed her brow.
I'm sorry, I panicked! You panicked?
Buttercup repeated incredulously.
You panicked? Blossom, that was a freaking bloodbath! All 3 of us are covered in the stuff! You killed Fuzzy Lumpkins unprovoked, and you massacred everyone in Town Hall even though Miss Bella was going to help us! They wanted to help us! And on top of that, you guilt me into killing the mayor? You're not panicking, Blossom! You're sick! They weren't going to help?
Blossom cried, eyes welling up with tears again.
They were tricking us! They were trying to make us think they were going to help, and then they'd have us executed! If they were going to punish us, they'd lock us up!
Argued Buttercup.
And I think that'd be just fine! Whatever keeps us away from people! We're dangerous now! And we still don't know the reason! Please stop yelling,
came a tiny voice, and the other 2 looked to see Bubbles' eyes open, brimming with tears.
Stop fighting. It's making things worse.
Buttercup exhaled slowly, attempting to calm herself.
She's right,
she said, looking into the pink eyes of her ill sister.
But Blossom, no more. Got it? No more.
Blossom nodded, overcome with confusion and guilt. She didn't understand what was happening to her. She was determined to try and fight it. Exhausted, the girls didn't bother cleaning themselves up or even taking their bloody clothes off as they settled themselves in Mojo's bed. They had all stopped crying, now feeling more numb than anything. Even though this whole ordeal was not a dream, it was still an extremely horrible nightmare. Cooed a friendly voice. Buttercup stirred, squinting her eyes as she looked around. The room was pitch black, all except for a swirling red vortex stuck to the back of the bedroom door.
What?
She croaked sleepily, rubbing her eyes.
Come here, Buttercup,
said the voice.
Come here.
Too curious to refuse, Buttercup lifted from the bed and approached the portal, hesitantly staring into it before floating through. It looked like your stereotypical idea of hell, Buttercup standing on a bare cliff with nothing but fire and lava surrounding her. Despite the heat, Buttercup felt chills run up her spine as she tried to figure out where she was.
Nice to see you again, Buttercup,
said a sickly sweet voice right behind her. She spun around to see him standing over her. She would have taken a step back, but she was very close to the edge of the cliff.
Oh, don't be afraid. I just want to talk.
About what?
Buttercup spat angrily.
About those pretty little accessories you have in your arms,
him replied. Buttercup gasped and suddenly got enraged.
Did you do this to us?
She screamed, but him simply laughed, waving a claw carelessly.
As much as I'd love to take the credit, I'm afraid that's simply not the case.
Do you know why this is happening?
Asked Buttercup, calming down a bit.
Alas, I do not know that either,
said him sadly.
But I have been having a blast watching this all play out. I noticed that you're not having too much fun with it, though.
Of course not,
Buttercup shouted, angry again.
I don't like hurting people, let alone killing them. I just want this to be over. I don't want to hurt anyone else.
Even though your sisters need you to?
There was a brief moment of silence.
What?
Said Buttercup after a moment.
Oh, let's face it,
Said him impatiently.
both Blossom and Bubbles count on you because you're brave and powerful. They trust you. You'd do anything for them.
Wouldn't you?
Yes, but Bubbles doesn't want this either.
Doesn't mean that they don't both need you.
Him knelt in front of Buttercup so that they were at eye level.
Think about it. Blossom needs you to help her with her new obsession. But Bubbles needs you to be there for her when she's all sad and grumpy.
He said that last part with a mock pout.
See? Everybody wins!
Except for me.
Buttercup argued.
Of course you do!
Him laughed, standing up again.
You win the satisfaction that you stood next to both of your sisters. No matter what, sometimes we need to make sacrifices to make other people happy. And in the end, you'll be glad that you were there.
I'm scared.
Buttercup admitted.
You should be.
Without warning, Him used his foot to push Buttercup right off the edge of the cliff. She screamed, finding that she suddenly couldn't fly, but right before falling into the lake of lava, she gasped, finding herself on the floor at the foot of the bed. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling through the darkness, her mind completely blank. A single tear escaped her eye before she finally scrambled back into bed. When Bubbles woke up, she found it was almost noon, and both of her sisters were missing. Her head pounded as she hopped off the bed and ventured out into the main room to see if she could find them. They were sitting on the floor, Buttercup sadly stroking Blossom's hair as she stared wide-eyed at nothing, trembling.
Is she okay?
Bubbles asked tentatively. Buttercup shook her head and set something gently on the floor. It was a gold tiara with a red jewel, but it was cracked and speckled with a crimson substance. Bubbles covered her mouth, but the tears didn't come this time.
I woke up early this morning and found her sitting on the floor, clutching the crown.
Buttercup explained.
And some of these stains are new.
She pointed to areas on Blossom's dress and face that were more bloody than they had been the day before. Bubbles felt like she couldn't feel anymore, couldn't scream, couldn't cry. She sat in front of Blossom, staring into her eyes, which looked a bit shadowed.
She agreed not to do it again.
Bubbles muttered.
Yeah, well, I guess it was stupid to believe her.
Buttercup shook Blossom gently to try and snap her out of her sickly stupor.
Blossom, come back to us. It's okay. You're safe.
Blossom blinked slowly, looked between her two sisters, and then pulled her knees to her chest, silently starting to cry.
So we're just going to hide forever?
Asked Bubbles.
I don't know,
Buttercup admitted.
I don't know what we're going to do. We had our chance to try and fix this, but Blossom ruined it. I'm sorry.
Blossom sniffled.
I didn't want anyone to know. Well, they know now,
Buttercup snapped.
We can't fix anything. We can't plead for forgiveness. We can't make excuses.
She sighed, trying to hold back the urge to cry again.
I'm so tired.
What happened to Princess's father?
Bubbles asked emotionlessly.
As far as I know, he wasn't home,
Buttercup replied.
Lucky for him. But however selfish and snooty he is, he doesn't deserve the pain he's going to feel when he sees his daughter's body.
Why didn't you go and clean it up?
Said Bubbles.
I had to stay with Blossom. She was panicking so hard she threw up. Bubbles, sometimes...
Buttercup's eyes fell sadly on Blossom.
Sometimes family is more important. We need to stick by each other.
Go do something about Princess, and I'll stay with Blossom.
Bubbles demanded with a level of authority that took Buttercup by surprise. She didn't argue, gently pushing Blossom into Bubbles' arms, and then flying out of the lair to head to the Morbuck's mansion. It was a disgusting sight. Princess, having been an aspiring Powerpuff Girl, appeared to have used her many gadgets and weapons to attempt to defend herself against Blossom. She had put up a surprisingly good fight, but the rich and spoiled little girl could not stand up to Blossom's deadly power. Buttercup stared sadly at Princess's body, which had been impaled on the wall of a vast hallway with a sword that had been meant for decoration. Her head was limp, blood pouring from her mouth as her jaw had been ripped off. She was also missing her right leg, and her hair was frizzy and matted with blood.
I'm sorry.
Buttercup murmured to her dead foe.
You were cold, heartless, nasty, and a pain in our butts. But you did not deserve this.
With difficulty, she pulled the sword from Princess's stomach, making her body fall to the floor with a wet. Just as she cradled Princess in her arms, a door opened, and Princess's father, King Morbux, came into the hall. He froze at the sight. Blood splattered along the floor and walls, vases and paintings lying in pieces on the stained carpet, and the lone Powerpuff Girl clutching his daughter's bloody and lifeless body. He and Buttercup stared at each other for a moment, King Morbux so horrified that he couldn't speak, though tears started welling up in his eyes. Buttercup felt so sorry for him as he dropped to his knees and sobbed. She sighed and carried Princess over to him, setting her body in front of him, which he clutched desperately. Buttercup's heart, already broken, ached even more as she calmly pulled out her axe blades and slashed his neck. He collapsed to the floor on top of Princess's body, head lopping at a strange angle, as the neck had not been completely severed, hanging on by a bit of flesh and sinew. There was no point in cleaning up, for the only reason she was going to in the first place was to keep King Morbux from seeing his daughter. Well, now it didn't matter. Looking down at her once green dress, she saw the massive amount of blood soaked into the fabric, and decided that they couldn't just spend the rest of their lives wearing tainted clothes. Though it felt disrespectful, Buttercup gathered up some rucksacks and filled them with some of Princess's clothes. She also decided to raid the kitchen for food, seeing as how there wasn't much in Mojo's lair. For good measure, Buttercup also took a white stuffed animal rabbit from Princess's room to give to Bubbles.
I'm back,
called Buttercup emotionlessly as she flew through the broken roof.
In here,
said Bubbles, and Buttercup found her and Blossom in the bathroom. Blossom was in the bathtub, looking very sickly and depressed, and Bubbles was hovering above her, washing her hair.
What did you do with Princess?
Bubbles,
Buttercup started, and Bubbles paused, looking to her sister.
Her father saw her. He was absolutely heartbroken. I didn't get rid of Princess's body.
So, what did you do?
Asked Bubbles slowly.
I brought them back together.
What is that supposed to mean?
I killed him.
Bubbles hovered in the air for a moment, and then went back to washing Blossom's hair.
I've lost all respect for you,
she muttered.
Bubbles, you didn't see him,
Buttercup insisted, trying to convince herself that her action was justifiable.
He completely broke. He really cared for Princess, much more than it seemed. It was a mercy killing.
Sure,
said Bubbles, rinsing Blossom's hair.
Mercy.
They were quiet as Bubbles lifted Blossom out of the tub and wrapped her in a towel. The poor thing didn't seem to be aware of her surroundings, simply staring off into space.
I brought some stuff,
Buttercup said quickly, following her sisters into the main room.
Clothes and food and stuff, and this, for you.
She held up the rabbit, and Bubbles took it.
I don't even know if I want to accept this,
she said.
You need it,
Buttercup insisted, and Bubbles nodded, hugging the rabbit. The three of them sifted through the clothes Buttercup had brought so that they could get dressed into something clean. Blossom started coming back to her normal self again, though she was overcome with guilt as she helped her sisters put the food in the kitchen that had also been taken from the mansion.
I'm sorry,
Blossom croaked to her sisters once they finished organizing things and were sitting at the table.
I'm so scared. I don't understand what's happening to me.
How long do you think it'll be before the cops find us here?
Asked Bubbles dully. Buttercup shrugged, resting her chin on the table.
My question is, why hasn't this happened to you yet?
She asked Bubbles.
I don't know, and I don't care. I hope it never happens.
Me too,
said her sisters together. About a week went by without any problems, except for the occasional trance Blossom seemed to go into as her sanity fluctuated. Buttercup took to staying up all night to make sure Blossom didn't fly off, and the lack of sleep was giving her dark shadows beneath her tired green eyes. Nothing bad had happened to Bubbles yet, but she spent most of her time sitting on the bed, clutching the stuffed bunny and staring out the window at the city. A couple of monsters came and went, but otherwise Townsville seemed all right. She felt so lonely, missing the professor, the mayor, Miss Bellum, and everyone that was still alive. Even though she wanted to just give herself up, She didn't want to leave her sisters. Things went south extremely fast when they were met with 3 unexpected visitors. The girls were all sitting together in the main room when they heard voices above them, all male.
What happened?
Said one.
There's a big hole in the roof! Maybe those stupid little girls came to beat him up and he hasn't fixed it yet!
The girls all looked at each other and stood quickly, knowing those voices very well. 3 boys suddenly descended into the lair through the hole, and they gasped in angry surprise at seeing them.
What are you sissies doing here?
Snarled Brick, the redhead. The girls couldn't answer, Buttercup holding Blossom's hand, as she had started to shake.
Where's Mojo Jojo?
Demanded Boomer, the blonde one.
Why do you look so bad?
Asked Butch, the black-haired boy. When they were met with no response, they all snapped,
Well?
Have you not been in Townsville for the past week?
Buttercup squeaked, trying to sound angry.
No,
Said Brick.
we've been in Citiesville. It's a much nicer place than boring old Townsville. Plus, you're not there.
Butch laughed.
So we can cause as much trouble as we want, and there ain't a darn thing you can do about it.
Gee, why is that, Butch?
Asked Boomer in mock curiosity.
It's because that whole town hates the Powerpuff Girls!
Butch exclaimed, and the Rowdy Rough Boys roared with laughter. Buttercup yelped, and the boys stopped, confusion on their faces. Blossom had pulled out her blades, and because Buttercup had been holding her hand, she had gotten a small cut.
Blossom, no.
Buttercup whimpered, but her pink eyes told Buttercup that Blossom was no longer there.
What are those?
Asked Brick slowly, actually looking scared at the sharp metal sword sticking out of the little girl's arms.
Please, Blossom, no.
Pleaded Buttercup again. Bubbles was merely watching, sadness plain on her face. She met the eyes of her male counterpart, who furrowed his brow in confusion.
Run.
She mouthed. However, before Boomer could relay the command to his brothers, Blossom had shot forward and thrust one of her blades straight through Brick's chest. His blood stained his shirt a darker red, and he slowly fell to the floor.
What the hell?
Butch screamed, but Blossom went after him next. He dodged, and both Boomer and Buttercup rushed at Blossom, Boomer trying to hit her and Buttercup trying to restrain her.
What are you doing?
Buttercup bellowed at Boomer as she wrapped her arms around her sister's waist.
Go! Run! You killed my brother!
Boomer shouted, but before he could throw an attack, Blossom ripped out of Buttercup's hold and slashed Boomer across the cheek. A generous amount of blood burst out, which hit Bubbles in the face. She didn't even flinch.
Boomer, he is still breathing!
Butch said, holding Brick in his arms, who was panting violently, clutching his chest. Just as he said that, Blossom went for him again, but Buttercup tackled her to the floor and punched her in the face.
Stop it!
She shrieked.
Don't you love me?
Blossom whimpered as tears streamed down her face.
Don't do this to me! Please don't do this to me!
Butch and Boomer began helping Brick up so that they could carry him out, but Boomer looked at Bubbles. Something about her was off, and for some reason, he was hit with extreme sadness and pity for the little Powerpuff. In the moment he had paused, Blossom broke free from Buttercup and took a blind slash at the boys, but they were able to leap out of the way. Unfortunately, this caused Brick a great deal of pain as he hit the floor. The Rowdy Rough Boys watched, wide-eyed, as Blossom stepped closer, her weapons at the ready.
What has happened to you?
Butch whimpered, his usual toughness gone. Blossom didn't answer. Butch and Boomer's eyes shot to Buttercup, who had come to stand next to her sister, and they were horrified to see the axe blades protruding from her own arms.
Buttercup, please!
I'm sorry.
She sniffled, raising her weapons in the air as she prepared to deliver a deadly blow, Blossom doing the same. Just then, sirens wailed outside, and Blossom jumped in fright. Buttercup hadn't been fast enough to stop her attack, but the distraction threw off her aim, and the only amount of damage she managed to do was dismember Butch's leg. He cried out in agony, which brought Blossom's attention back to them, but before she could do anything, Boomer screamed and blasted both girls across the room. In a flash, he and his brothers were gone from the lair. The sirens sounded as though they were under water to Bubbles, as did the screams and yells as the police below the volcano were slaughtered by her sisters. She simply stood there, clutching her bunny, which was speckled with blood like her face. Her mind was blank, her body was cold, and her heart was numb. Bubbles didn't pay much attention as Blossom and Buttercup beckoned her to follow them before any more reinforcements arrived. She obeyed, not looking at the massive amount of crimson below, and the girls flew away as fast as they could. They ended up landing in a clearing of the forest where Fuzzy Lumpkins had lived. The girl sat against a fallen tree, Blossom sobbing into her bloody arms. Bubbles watched a beetle maneuver through the grass and leaves on the ground, wishing she could be as carefree as a simple bug.
Do you think Brick will be okay?
She mumbled. Buttercup sighed, rubbing her temples. She was just as bloody as her sister.
I don't know, okay?
She grumbled.
I'm tired. I don't want to worry about some stupid boy.
That stupid boy doesn't deserve to die,
said Bubbles.
So, Blossom!
Buttercup growled, looking at her.
Where are we going to go now? Who are we going to murder next? How far are we going to have to leave a blood trail behind us before this is over?
Blossom continued to sob.
I don't know,
She wailed.
I don't even want to live anymore.
Don't say that,
said Buttercup softly.
We need you. We just need to figure out how to end this nightmare.
I would say I don't want anyone else getting hurt,
said Bubbles quietly.
but it'd be pointless. More people are going to get hurt.
Bubbles will be fine.
Don't!
Bubbles screamed, and her sisters flinched.
You keep saying we'll fix this, or we'll figure this out. I don't want to kill anymore. Blossom, stop killing people. You have just as much blood on your hands as she has. The only difference is you're not going crazy. So don't say everything is going to be okay, because it's not!
Bubbles huffed angrily, and then she simply shifted so that she had her back to them.
I guess I was just trying to convince myself,
said Buttercup guiltily. Just then, Blossom stood up and shot away. With a cry of alarm, her sisters went after her.
Blossom, where are you going?
She didn't answer, but flew like a rocket as fast as she could over Townsville. Luckily, no one saw them, but Buttercup became worried when they entered the sketchy part of the city.
Blossom!
Buttercup tried again, but Blossom suddenly descended, and they continued to follow. To Buttercup's surprise, they had arrived at the Gangrene Gang's hideout. She groaned, and Bubbles was hit with the first wave of strong emotion she had felt in days. She was panicking, knowing what was going to happen, and she wanted to stop it.
Blossom, please,
said Buttercup, but Blossom let out a violent growl, and Buttercup recoiled in fear.
Help me,
she said to Buttercup, her swords bursting from her arms. Trying to hold back more tears, she brought out her axes. She didn't want to do this, but him was right. She had to be loyal to her sister, no matter what.
Powerpuff Girls!
Shouted Ace as Blossom kicked the door open. His angry surprise turned into terrified shock as he glanced at their weapons.
What the?
Yo, boss! I think the Powerpuff Girls have gone local!
Exclaimed little Arturo, and all 5 of them took a defensive stance. Blossom grinded her teeth, her eyes blank as she stared right into Ace's sunglassed face. Buttercup gave a dry sob, just wanting to get it over with. In her emotional desperation, she shot forward and brought her right axe down vertically, completely slicing little Arturo in half.
Jesus Christ!
Ace shouted, and he made to run for the door, but Blossom slashed him. Luckily, he moved out of the way just in time, so the only thing that got hit were his sunglasses. They flew off of his face and smashed on the floor. When she swung at him again, he threw himself to the floor and crawled under the table. Snake was already under there as well. Big Billy let out a shriek that none of them had ever heard from him, and it scared Ace even more. He wanted to do something, but he was much too frightened. Snake met his eyes, wordlessly asking, "What do we do?" Ace shook his head quickly, trembling from the trauma. He had to keep from screaming when Grubber's limbless and headless torso landed beside the table. Ace covered his mouth, resisting the urge to vomit. Blossom and Buttercup seemed to be having trouble with Big Billy, for he was still screaming and crying, his heavy footsteps quick and staggering. Snake suddenly squeaked as Bubbles knelt on the floor to peer at them. He and Ace made to back away, but she hurriedly beckoned them toward her.
Run!
She hissed.
Run before they see you!
Ace and Snake exchanged looks before darting out from under the table and out the window. They tried to ignore their brief glance of Big Billy, who was still stumbling around, but missing half of his skin. Bubbles watched them, hoping that they'd get a far enough distance away to not be tracked down and killed. At last, the chaos ceased, and Bubbles unwillingly turned her attention to the scene. Blossom sat in the far corner, curled into a tight ball and rocking back and forth, eyes wide. Buttercup was sobbing as she looked at the blood on her own hands, then at the 3 mangled corpses on the wooden floor of the tiny shack.
I'm sorry,
She kept muttering. Bubbles didn't want to look at the gore any longer, so she stepped outside and sat against the wall. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't sob,
just simply stared at the dead grass. Then her sisters began talking, and she listened carefully.
Why?
Buttercup croaked.
We needed somewhere to go,
Blossom replied.
Couldn't we have just told them to leave? Why did we have to kill them? Because they'd come back with help,
said Blossom, her voice emotionless.
And we'd be found again. Where's Ace and Snake?
Asked Buttercup quickly.
I don't care. You don't care that they escaped, but you care if cops come back to take us away? How is that logical?
Buttercup laughed coldly.
Oh wait, you can't think logically anymore. You've gone completely insane, and I'm helping you with this crap. I don't want to do this, but I'm your sister, aren't I? And apparently I don't love you if I don't help you slaughter people. No one will miss them. That's not the point!
Bubbles continued to listen to the bickering as a little squirrel trotted in front of her a few yards away.
Cheep, cheep, cheep.
She called gently, getting the squirrel's attention.
Cheep, 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 cheep.
The small rodent bounded up to her and gave a little chatter in reply.
Cheep,
said Bubbles. The squirrel curled up in her lap, and she started to stroke its soft fur. After a minute, the squirrel shrieked, and it dashed away from Bubbles, its shoulder bleeding. Eyes wide and body trembling, Bubbles slowly looked at her arms. They were covered in horribly sharp metal spikes, each about 3 inches long and 1 inch thick at their base. The cluster stopped at her elbow.
No, no,
she whimpered, and she finally broke out in sobs. It was a stroke of luck that she hadn't accidentally killed the squirrel, and hoped that its injury was small, but it didn't change the fact that it had finally happened to her. She was a weapon. The other two were still arguing as Bubbles quietly walked back into the house. They froze when she held up her arms, and Blossom whimpered, anxiously running her hands through her bloody hair. Buttercup covered her face at the sight of the horrid spikes on her innocent sister's arms, and she just wanted to crawl into a cave and never come out. Bubbles dismally retracted the spikes, hanging her head. Just then, Blossom spoke, almost inaudibly.
We're so stupid.
We?
Buttercup repeated.
You are stupid! This wouldn't have happened if we just would have gone for help after you killed Mojo Jojo!
No, what I mean is,
Blossom said calmly, standing up.
The answer was in the professor's lab the whole time. What are you talking about?
Buttercup asked slowly.
Antidote X,
she explained.
If we get rid of our powers, it'll get rid of the weapons too.
I admit, that's the best idea you've had in weeks,
Buttercup growled.
But what are we supposed to do after, huh? Go back into Townsville and say, don't worry, we're safe and normal. Everything is dandy.
We'd have to go somewhere else,
said Blossom.
Start over.
We're children. We can hardly take care of ourselves even with powers.
We have only 2 other options,
said Blossom.
Turn ourselves in and get put to death, or kill ourselves. What sounds more appealing?
Starting over,
Buttercup grumbled.
Living with the guilt is punishment enough, but getting rid of our powers is what we deserve.
Bubbles, how did those spikes show up?
Asked Blossom.
I was petting a squirrel,
she replied.
Did you kill it?
Asked Buttercup, choking up slightly, and Bubbles shook her head.
Thankfully, I only grazed its shoulder. It's only a matter of time before Bullet finds out that the Powerpuff Girls are bad. Oh my God!
Said Blossom loudly, and the other 2 jumped.
I hope this didn't happen to Bullet, too!
If we were to go find her, we'd have to do it after we took the antidote,
said Buttercup.
I am not taking any chances on accidentally hurting her or any other animal.
Wow, that's so thoughtful,
Bubbles spat sarcastically. Her sisters didn't retort.
So what, are we going to sleep with a bunch of dead bodies until we sneak back home?
Buttercup asked Blossom angrily.
Let's go take shelter in a box or something,
Blossom replied sadly.
This is worse than when the city hated us for having powers in the first place,
Buttercup murmured, and the 3 of them flew out of the house into the nearby dump. They found a large cardboard box and crawled into it, huddling together and waiting until nightfall when they'd eventually grow tired and fall asleep. Echoed a sweet voice from somewhere outside the box. Bubbles shifted and opened her eyes. It was dark and cold, the moon waning high in the sky. She wondered if she had imagined the voice, but then heard it say,
Little Bubbles, come here, sweetheart.
Careful not to wake her sisters, she slowly floated out of the box to try and find the source of the voice. Bubbles followed the soothing words throughout the garbage dump, squinting her eyes through the darkness. The voice kept telling her warmer or cooler to guide her, and finally she noticed a red glow behind a huge tractor tire. Peering around it, she saw a scarlet vortex swirling on the side of a broken refrigerator. The voice spoke as Bubbles came closer hesitantly.
Don't be scared, Bubbles.
It cooed.
Come here. Come.
Who are you?
She squeaked, terrified.
Come here, Bubbles.
The voice replied. With a shaky breath, Bubbles entered the vortex. She found herself on a cliff in a vast inferno, flames dancing around her, the surface of the lava bubbling menacingly. There was no sky, just endless blackness. Bubbles shrieked as a cyclone of burning ash appeared in front of her, and as soon as it cleared, she was looking into the smiling crimson face of him.
So good to see you, Bubbles!
He exclaimed airily.
I've missed you so much!
Bubbles held her hands to her mouth, staring up at him. She was terrified.
Aw, didn't you miss me? You break my heart, little cupcake.
Why am I here?
Bubbles whimpered.
Oh, I just wanted to have a little chat. Maybe a tea party.
With a poof, both Bubbles and him were suddenly sitting at a table with a flowery pink tablecloth, and in the center was a white ceramic teapot, matching cups sitting at its base. Him nonchalantly poured Bubbles a cup of tea, and then one for himself, though Bubbles did not feel much like drinking it.
Why am I here?
She repeated.
Well, out of boredom, I decided to observe you girls, feeling a bit too lazy to come out and try to destroy you,
said him, sipping at his tea.
And the show is surprisingly eventful.
With a gasp, Bubbles showed him her newly acquired spikes.
Did you do this?
She squeaked, but him waved a claw at her.
No, that wasn't me,
he replied cheerily.
I don't know who the genius behind this plot is, but I give him a round of applause. 5 stars!
Bubbles started sobbing, retracting the spikes and resting against the table, burying her face in her arms. Him pouted.
I see that party isn't cheering you up. Let's invite some friends.
With a snap of his claw, the table was much larger. Looking up, Bubbles shrieked in horror, for sitting in chairs around the perimeter were taxidermied versions of many familiar people. Mojo Jojo, Professor Utonium, Fuzzy Lumpkins, Miss Bellum, the Mayor, Princess and her father, Lil Arturo, Grubber, and Big Billy. Their bodies were thrown crudely back together, all of their eyes and mouths sewn shut, and their skin was still bloody. In front of each of the corpses was a teacup.
There,
said Him softly.
Feel better?
Bubbles didn't respond, knowing full well that Him was tormenting her.
Anyway, I've noticed that you've sort of been a background character in all of this.
What do you mean?
Asked Bubbles.
Whereas both of your sisters have killed, you yourself haven't harmed a single soul, save for that little squirrel a few hours ago. But it was just a little accidental scratch. Not only that, but you haven't even helped dispose of any of the bodies. You haven't aided your sisters in any way.
I'm not a bad person,
she retorted, trying to mask her fear with anger.
I help people, not hurt them. I'm afraid of leaving Blossum and Buttercup. Blossom really scares me now.
You've never had the urge to kill someone? Not even a teensy-weensy bit?
Asked Him.
No,
said Bubbles truthfully.
And I'm not going to.
Not even with your new and exciting power?
No.
Do you really think you can keep your innocence forever?
Bubbles stared into his green eyes, her lip trembling.
It's already gone.
Bowing her head, she looked at her reflection in her tea.
But why did Buttercup fall into it? Why is she helping Blossom?
Because she knows she needs to be there for both of you,
said Him.
She hasn't been there for me!
She's tried to comfort you, and still attempts to argue with Blossom.
His smile widened.
But Blossom herself has
given up on you.
Bubbles flinched at his drastic change of tone.
She feels betrayed that you haven't helped her own sister.
She's not in her right mind!
Bubbles argued.
Once we take the Antidote X, we can start over and repair a relationship!
You believe that?
Him hissed acidly, suddenly teleporting right next to Bubbles, mouth close to her ear. She felt her body freeze up in terror.
Do you think that Blossum is really going to go back to normal when your powers are gone? What do you think she'll do when you try to make it on your own in the real world? Steal? Sell drugs? Get into more risque occupations?
She stammered, her eyes brimming with tears.
And Buttercup will still stick by her side, won't she? She'll do whatever Blossum tells her because she strives to remain loyal. And you'll just sit back and watch as her lives deteriorate until they're
Nothing.
Bubbles didn't speak as the table and cadavers disappeared, yet she was still sitting in her chair. Him was standing a few feet away from her, grinning his sinister grin.
But keep working hard, because even when the curtain falls,
The show must go on.
The air was suddenly filled with Bubbles' screams as blackened vines wrapped around the chair, tying her to it so that she couldn't move. More vines held the chair's legs firmly to the ground, and the lava quickly began to rise. It rushed toward her, Him was laughing, and she continued to shriek. Panting, Bubbles opened her eyes, staring at the moon and stars. Covered in perspiration, she shivered in the cold night air, sitting up and looking at the refrigerator in front of her. The portal was gone. Overcome by even more depression, Bubbles rose into the air and slowly made her way back to her sisters. Blossom and Buttercup awoke to see Bubbles sitting outside of the box, drawing in the dirt with a stick. Buttercup approached her, and was heartbroken to see that she was drawing the professor, who was smiling contently. She swallowed hard, turning away.
Okay, we need to think of a way to get home without being seen,
said Blossom, sounding much more like her old self.
We could dash from cloud to cloud,
suggested Buttercup, pointing to the sky. It was a beautiful blue, but scattered here and there were fluffy white clouds floating without a care in the world.
We're going to get soaked,
said Blossom.
But that's a good plan.
Problem.
Bubbles muttered, not looking up from her doodle.
How do we get out of Townsville when our powers are gone? We won't be able to fly.
Oh yeah,
said Blossom.
Maybe we can take the stuffing out of one of your larger stuffed animals and pretend to be a dog or something. Brilliant,
Buttercup grunted sarcastically.
If you have any better ideas, I'd love to hear them,
Blossom snapped, but Buttercup simply shook her head. Without another word between the three of them, they shot straight upward and hid in the nearest cloud. Just like Blossom had said, they were soaked in seconds, but they didn't care. Before shooting to the next cloud, they'd peek out at the city to see if anyone was looking up at all. They were lucky to not have been spotted once the clouds became more spaced out the closer they got to their house. Finally, the girls made it, entering their home for the first time in what felt like years. Bubbles spotted Octi still sitting on the couch, and she grabbed him, hugging him tight. Blossom wasted no time, gesturing for her sisters to follow her into the lab. There was still a huge scorch mark on the tile from when her and Buttercup incinerated the professor's body. They each sifted through cabinets to look for the chemical, hoping against hope that the professor had some stored somewhere.
Aha!
said Buttercup. The other two flew to her side and spotted a bottle of Chemical X sitting on a shelf, and right next to it was the Antidote X.
Hurry! I want this all to end!
Blossom gently took the bottle, popped the cork, and poured a generous amount in her hand, desperately patting it on her face and arms. Bubbles and Buttercup did the same, and once they were done, they all exchanged looks.
Do either of you feel any different?
Blossom asked. Buttercup jumped, trying to take flight, but she couldn't. Bubbles attempted to use heat vision, but nothing happened. Blossom looked at her arms and tried to bring out her blades, but they didn't come. Buttercup fell to her knees and started sobbing hysterically, and her sisters rushed to her side.
It's over!
She wailed.
It's finally over!
Bubbles met Blossom's eyes, and Blossom smiled. However, Bubbles' expression didn't change. No smile, no tears, nothing. She was still numb. It felt odd to walk everywhere as they wandered around the house to pack supplies. If they were going to start over, they needed to at least be prepared. Buttercup even grabbed their camping tent so that they didn't have to sleep in a box again. Once they had everything they needed, the girls realized that there was no way dressing up as an animal was going to work.
The car,
said Blossom.
We can try to drive out of the city. We don't know how to drive,
Buttercup exclaimed.
Plus, they'll see that it's us in the car.
Maybe we can sneak onto a cargo train,
suggested Bubbles.
Homeless people do it all the time.
It's worth a shot,
said Blossom.
But we still need to get to the train station without being noticed. We could dress like boys,
said Buttercup.
I mean, we're already filthy and wearing scrappy pants and shirts. All we'd have to do is change our hair and maybe put on hats.
Like the time I pretended to be Boomer,
said Bubbles.
All right, let's do it,
said Blossom. So the girls began to make themselves look as boyish as possible. Blossom pulled her damaged hair into a bun and hid it under a baseball cap. Buttercup put on a gray hoodie, combing her black hair over her face, wearing the hood up, and Bubbles took out her pigtails, capping her head with a black beanie. The three of them also found shirts that were plain and a bit more baggy, and Blossom discovered a bandana she could use to obscure her face, Bubbles doing the same with a light scarf.
I'll say one thing,
said Buttercup with a dry laugh as they all looked at each other.
I wouldn't date a single one of us.
Blossom giggled faintly, but Bubbles seemed to have the inability to feel humored at the joke. Walking to Townsville train station was surprisingly easy. Carrying their rucksacks on their backs, the girls kept their heads down to avoid meeting anyone's eye. Passers-by tried to avoid the filthy and unkempt little boys. The three of them had to be clever as they snuck around to the cargo section of the train currently waiting at the station as people boarded. They crawled into a car and were small enough to hide behind a large crate that said, "Fragile," in large red letters. None of the girls spoke as they traveled across the country, each of them simply thinking about everything that had happened to them and the possibilities of their future. Blossom's guilt was still eating at her sanity, and she found herself twitching a couple times every hour, and Buttercup was curled up in a ball, hiding her face as she tried to convince herself that they were going to be okay. Bubbles sat on the edge of the car with the door open, dangling her legs freely, watching the scenery fly by. The landscapes were so beautiful and peaceful. After about 12 hours riding the train, the girls finally got off, each of them glad that they didn't need to obscure their faces anymore. They weren't sure where they were, but it was somewhere out in the country, probably in the far northeast. It took another 2 hours to find signs of civilization. It was still a nightmare to travel on foot since they couldn't fly. At last, the sisters climbed a hill, finding themselves on a cliff that looked over the nearest town. It was small, but was bustling with activity, seeming peaceful enough. The sun started to set, and Blossom forced herself to smile, exhaling heavily.
Well,
she said strongly,
here we are, our new home, and the start of a new life. Do you think we'll be able to make it?
Asked Buttercup in concern.
I think we will,
Blossom replied.
It's small, no one knows us, we're just 3 little girls looking for a home. 3 little girls that are on the run from murder,
Buttercup murmured.
But no one knows,
said Blossom happily, though her eye twitched. Bubbles noticed this, but didn't react, her expression apathetic.
We'll show everyone how good we are. We'll be kind and helpful, we'll find jobs and somewhere to live. Until that point, we can sleep in the tent. What about school?
Asked Buttercup.
Not sure,
Blossom admitted.
But I think survival is a bit more important, I hate to say. Maybe there's a library to at least tutor ourselves in our free time.
She turned her back on the town, grinning at her sisters excitedly.
It'll be great! You'll see! Forget all of that stuff back in Townsville! Here we begin our new
Her sentence was cut off by her shrill scream as Bubbles pushed Blossom as hard as she could off the cliff. Buttercup gave a cry of horror as she ran to the edge to watch Blossom plummet to the trees and rocks miles below them. Bubbles joined her, expression still not changing, eyes never leaving her falling sister. There was a soft, yet sickening crunch as Blossom hit the rocks, dying upon impact. Buttercup's mouth was gaping, green eyes wide with horror as she was unable to look away from the tiny crimson dot below. She quickly looked at Bubbles, who had opened her bag and pulled out Octi. Without giving the octopus a second glance, she gently tossed it off the cliff to join her dead sister.
Bubbles!
Buttercup squeaked, looking into her blue eyes. She met Buttercup's gaze momentarily, face still showing apathy, and then she silently turned to trudge back down the hill. Buttercup was speechless, watching Bubbles walk away, and then slowly sat in the grass, looking out at the sunset as tears silently slid down her cheeks. Losing both of her sisters was very painful for Buttercup, but she tried to stay strong, striving to build her new life like they had planned. Upon entering the town, she began asking people if there was somewhere a little girl without a home could turn to. Though it didn't sound very appealing, she was told about a small adoption center and decided that that was the best option. She'd have food, clothes, and a roof over her head, and maybe, just maybe, she'd be taken away by a brand new family. Buttercup decided to go by the name Sarah, after Miss Bellum. Life at the orphanage was surprisingly mellow, and she found herself as content as she could be while the weight of her guilt was still on her shoulders. She made a few friends with whom she played, and was schooled in basic subjects. There was plenty of food, and the environment was comfortable, but Buttercup ended up developing insomnia, going most nights without a wink of sleep. At the age of 9, Buttercup was finally adopted by a wealthy man named Mr. Peters. He lived in the nearest city in a rather large house, but he had no wife or any other kids. He was quite lenient with Buttercup, saying that he wanted her to feel safe and comfortable, and that she didn't have to refer to him as Dad, but John, as was his first name.
Heck, you can call me Johnny if you want,
he told her, and that's what she started to address him as. Mr. Peters worked in publishing, and was gone for most of the day. Buttercup was assigned a small set of daily chores in exchange for allowance, and was given freedom to do whatever she wanted as long as the chores and her homework were done. Having lost all interest in fighting due to her traumatic past, she decided to take up the guitar. Her songs never had names or lyrics, but losing herself in the instrument became her zen. Growing into her teenage years, Buttercup liked to wander the city with her guitar slung over her shoulder, and find a nice area to just sit and play for people. She even had a sign that said, "No money, please," because all she wanted was to share her music, especially to those who seemed to be having a bad day. Buttercup was pretty as a teen, growing her hair to her shoulders, which she'd pull into a low side ponytail, but kept her bangs long to fall in front of her face, resembling the style she had worn when she had to disguise herself as a boy. She even wore jeans and a hoodie most of the time, but they were still feminine enough for her taste. The past was never brought up to Mr. Peters, her new friends, or anyone else. She never mentioned having sisters, never spoke about parents, and never told how and why she came to the city. Most of all, she never went back to Townsville, and even though Buttercup would never be able to get rid of her guilt and shame, she tried her best to keep herself happy. Bubbles had snuck back onto another cargo train, going straight back to Townsville. Upon arrival, she remained in her disguise until she got to the police station, where she removed her beanie and scarf and turned herself in. Bubbles sat in a cold cell until her court hearing. In front of the judge, citizens of Townsville, and the new mayor, Bubbles told the entire story from start to finish. The new powers, the death of Mojo Jojo, Professor Utonium, Fuzzy Lumpkins, etc., as well as the psychotic behavior of Blossom. She told how Buttercup assisted Blossom out of guilt, the constant arguing about coming clean, and how they came to the conclusion that they needed to get rid of their powers. Then Bubbles explained that she herself had never harmed anyone or even touched one of the bodies. She said she was almost positive that Ace and Snake, as well as the Rowdy Rough Boys, managed to get away and were still alive. Bubbles did admit to accidentally scratching the squirrel when her deadly power finally came, but otherwise did not aid in any of the violence. The last thing Bubbles told them was that she killed Blossom. She explained that she knew Blossom was never going to be the same, and that she ruined both hers and Buttercup's life, as well as many others. Bubbles was sick of Blossom manipulating Buttercup, and she didn't want her wreaking any more havoc or hurting anyone else. When asked about the whereabouts of Buttercup, she truthfully said she had no idea because she hadn't known where the train had taken them. After her entire confession, Bubbles stopped speaking altogether. It seemed that, after getting all of that off of her chest, her mind finally decided to break, and she became mute. The jury was sympathetic, and a majority of the courtroom had started crying during her story. Due to the level of trauma Bubbles had endured, along with the sudden inability to speak, she was declared innocent by reason of insanity, even though her mind was still there. She didn't protest in any way. So Bubbles was admitted to the children's hospital, kept in a ward for kids with mild mental disabilities. She still never spoke, and didn't even smile. In fact, the last time she could even remember smiling was before Mojo Jojo's death. Ever since that nightmare had started, her frown never turned upside down. When Bubbles grew a little older, the court decided to put her in a boarding school, but had to explain her situation to the staff and the fact that she couldn't speak. Bubbles' blonde hair grew long, halfway down her back, and it usually hung in a curtain over one shoulder. She was extremely skinny because of her low appetite, but she did well in her classes despite her pain. The other kids in the boarding school tended to avoid the blonde girl that never spoke or smiled, and Bubbles spent most of her time sitting in a chair in her room, facing the window, but not looking out at the city, instead keeping her head bowed, staring at the floor. The staff were very friendly with Bubbles, being careful not to trigger any sort of panic attack, but that never happened. Bubbles remained expressionless, silent, and did everything she was told. She did, however, keep a little whiteboard that hung around her neck and dry erase marker with her so that she could communicate when she needed. If Bubbles wasn't studying or sulking, she was drawing. The quality of the doodles never changed over the years, simply remaining childish little scribbles. No matter what, though, the drawings always consisted of her sisters, the professor, and all of her friends and foes that had died. They were always smiling. At the age of 15, Bubbles was comfortable enough to leave the school in her free time if she wanted to walk around. Of course, everyone in the city still knew the former Powerpuff Girl, but hardly anyone acknowledged her out of awkward pity. She watched her feet as she journeyed down the streets, petting a stray dog or cat whenever one passed.
Bubbles?
Said a familiar voice, and she glanced up. She looked into the face of the Gang Green Gang's leader, Ace. He didn't wear sunglasses anymore, and his clothes were much less shabby than they had been when he was 17. His hair was even a bit shorter. Without warning, Ace threw his arms around Bubbles, embracing her so tightly she coughed.
My God, it's great to see you,
he said, his voice expressing strong relief. Bubbles pulled away and wrote on her board quickly. "Where is Snake?" it said.
He's fine,
Ace replied, furrowing his brow at the board.
Why you got that thing?
She erased the previous sentence and scribbled a new one. "I can't talk." He looked shocked, and his eyes became a bit more glossy. He grabbed her tiny hand gently.
Come on, come say hi to Snake,
he urged. Bubbles nodded and followed him through the city.
He goes by his real name, though. He actually gets very upset if you call him Snake. He stopped using that name after the day that...
He choked and didn't go on. Surprisingly, the two remaining Gang Green Gang members still lived in their old shack, but it had been renovated, now resembling an extremely small and shabby wooden house. Before going inside, Ace led Bubbles around the back and pointed at 3 stones sitting in a row, each with words carved into them. One said, "Little Arturo," the next said, "Grubber," and the final said, "Big Billy."
When Snake and me came back, which was about a week after that day, we gathered up what was left of them and buried them,
Ace explained sadly.
We wanted them to have a proper burial.
Bubbles' lip trembled, staring at the graves.
Come inside and sit down. Snake will be happy to see you too.
Upon entering the shack, Snake, who was even thinner than he was when he was a teenager, stood from the table, shocked to see the young lady. He no longer wore a hat, and his clothes consisted of jeans and a simple long-sleeved shirt.
"Is that Bubbles?"
he exclaimed, still drawing out his S's. Ace nodded and gestured for her to sit down. She took her board from around her neck and set it on the table. Snake stared at it, a bit bemused.
San,
said Ace, shortening Sanford.
Bubbles can't talk.
"Oh,"
said Snake, looking shocked. Bubbles wrote on her board again. "What happened to you?" she asked.
Well, I'm sure you realize by now that you saved our freaking lives,
said Ace with a sad chuckle.
That's how we knew that it wasn't your fault, that you had nothing to do with it. We're so grateful to you.
"We stopped committing crimes after that,"
said Snake.
"After experiencing that entire thing, we wanted no more part in troublemaking."
The 2 of us ended up hiding out in an alley, a good distance away from this shack,
Ace continued.
We built a sort of fort out of boxes to hide in case Blossum and Buttercup decided to come after us. Did they?
No, Bubbles replied.
What were those things they had?
Asked Snake softly. Bubbles sighed. It's a long story, she wrote, then erased it and continued. Right after the fighting stopped, it happened to me too. Next she wrote, but I didn't use it.
I knew you wouldn't,
said Ace with a dismal smile.
Anyway, we didn't get the news that you three disappeared and then you came back a couple days later until like a week. We were hiding, so we didn't see a newspaper until one was thrown in the dumpster in the alley. The entire story was on the front page, and it changed our entire outlook on life. Snake and me.
Don't call me that!
Snake suddenly bellowed, and Bubbles jumped, horrified.
Sorry,
Ace murmured quickly.
San and me didn't really turn our lives around. We didn't really have the confidence. But, like San said, we stopped the crime and stuff and just try to make it through each day. It's tough. San and me aren't really the working type, so we ain't got jobs. But we're alive.
Thanks to you,
Snake said softly. Bubbles turned back to her whiteboard. Blossom is dead. I pushed her off a cliff, she said, and the boys fell silent. She decided to go on. Even after we got rid of our powers, I knew it wasn't over.
I can understand that,
said Ace sadly.
Where's Buttercup?
Asked Snake. I don't know. I left her behind.
Bubbles, we owe you our lives,
Ace said desperately.
I don't even know what we could do to make it up to you.
You don't need to make it up to me. I'm just sorry I couldn't help the others, Bubbles replied.
I know they'd be thankful too,
said Snake, and Bubbles nodded sadly.
But you know, I can't imagine the pain you're in. You were caught in the middle of that whole thing.
Bubbles' throat felt painfully tight, and her eyes fell to the table.
You did the right thing,
Ace assured her.
I know it feels like you should have done more, but there was nothing more you could do. Everything that was within your power, you did right.
You don't happen to know where the Rowdy Rough Boys are, do you? Asked Bubbles, and Ace blinked.
No,
he replied.
I have no idea where they could be. Why, did something happen to them too?
Bubbles nodded, writing another sentence. They're alive. It wasn't a question.
I'm sure you'll find them,
said Snake. I'm going to go, said Bubbles, and the boys nodded dismally.
It was nice to see you,
Snake said sincerely as they all stood, him and Ace giving her a brief hug.
Stay strong, okay?
Said Ace. Bubbles nodded again and slowly left the shack. Before she walked away, she wandered around to the 3 graves and knelt in front of them. She was sad that she didn't have any flowers to place on them, so instead she took her marker and drew a heart on each stone. Bubbles knew that eventual rain would erase them, but this would suffice until she could bring flowers. With that, Bubbles continued the way she came, going back to the main city. It actually took some time, but Bubbles finally managed to figure out where the Rowdy Rough Boys were. They were a few miles down the ocean in a little house on a grassy cliff. She had to ride a ferry to get there, and when she arrived, she nervously approached the door, knocking lightly. It was Boomer who opened it, and Bubbles saw that he had a large scar on his cheek. He looked confused for a few seconds, but then gasped loudly.
Bubbles?
He exclaimed in disbelief, and Bubbles nodded. She pointed to the board hanging from her neck, where she had already written, I can't talk. This made Boomer's face fall, and he quickly beckoned her inside. The living room was small and decently cluttered, which made sense because they weren't very organized boys. Butch was on the couch watching television, and Bubbles' heart broke when she saw that he was still missing one of his legs. He sat up quickly when he saw the blonde girl.
That's not,
he said, and Boomer nodded.
Brick, get your ass in here,
he called, and Brick came down the hall and entered the room, but he froze when he saw Bubbles.
Holy shit, dude,
he croaked. It seemed his vocal cords had been damaged. Bubbles remembered Brick getting pierced straight through the chest, and quickly wrote on her board. Are you okay? She asked, and Brick furrowed his brow.
Yeah, are you? What's up with the whiteboard? She can't talk,
Boomer replied, and both of his brothers immediately looked painfully sympathetic. Bubbles shook her board desperately, trying to get an answer from the red-headed boy. Brick pulled up his shirt, exposing an enormous scar, and then turned to reveal a matching one on his back.
I'm alive because of our powers,
he explained.
But I was pretty damn close to dying. Sometimes I have trouble breathing, and if my heart rate increases too much, my chest hurts, and obviously my voice is shot. There was no saving my leg,
Butch added.
But it's not so bad since we can fly.
You still have your powers? Bubbles asked.
Yeah,
Boomer replied.
why, don't you?
We got rid of ours with the Antidote X so we could stop that ordeal, said Bubbles.
What was that anyway?
Asked Butch. Bubbles hesitated. She hadn't told the story to Ace and Snake, but she felt the boys deserved to know. If you get me a pen and paper, I'll explain what I can, she wrote. Brick was the one to oblige, handing Bubbles a pad of lined yellow paper. She tried to write as fast as she could, explaining everything in the least amount of words possible. When she was done, there were quite a few pages, and Boomer read it out loud to his brothers. They were absolutely dumbfounded.
I don't understand,
said Brick, sounding almost desperate.
Why did you girls get bad powers?
Bubbles blinked and wrote a large question mark on her whiteboard.
Look,
said Boomer, and he took out a switchblade from his pocket. Bubbles let out a soundless cry of horror as he slashed the back of his own wrist. However, after setting the blade down, he pressed his other hand to the cut, held it there for a few seconds as it glowed, and then lifted it. The wound was gone, not even leaving a scar.
The ability just appeared out of nowhere when I was leaning over Brick's injury and trying to figure out what to do. I had set my hands on his chest, and my hands started glowing, and the blood began to stop. I was crazy confused, but went with it. It took about 30 minutes, and I was exhausted when it was done, but I managed to fix most of the damage. Of course, it was bad, so I couldn't heal everything.
we were all sort of freaking out,
said Butch.
but we didn't care how the hell it happened, because Brick was alive. Crippled, but alive.
Look who's talking, Gimpy!
Brick spat, and Butch stuck out his tongue.
Anyway, a few days later, mine came along. We were flying around to find someplace to live, and luckily we found this stinky old place, and we went in to check it out. We hoped that you girls wouldn't find us here, but Boomer mentioned you telling him to run. When we were discussing it, I went into this wicked trance, and was able to tune into your emotions.
Bubbles' eyes were wide upon hearing this.
I found out that I could feel anyone's emotions if I thought about them. Blossom's were really disturbing. Anyway, I realized that you hadn't been part of it. Man, after feeling all that shit, we didn't want to get in a fight ever again.
What about you? Bubbles asked Butch quickly.
Mine came the night after the day Brick got his.
He replied.
I was sitting on the edge of the cliff, just watching the ocean and massaging my stump. It still ached, even after Boomer healed the skin over. Then my hands started glowing like his had, and the pain went away. I flew back inside and shook the other two awake, because they had been sleeping.
He smacked me over the head.
Boomer interrupted spitefully.
Yeah, but then I took the pain away.
Butch pressed on.
Turns out, it's sort of like a painkiller, because the ache in my leg came back hours later. But I soothed it until it went away on its own. I'm able to help Brick with his chest pains when they come.
Bubbles was feeling a bit overwhelmed. Why did you get helpful powers? She scribbled.
I actually thought about that,
Brick replied.
and after hearing your side of the story, it kind of confirms my theory. I think there's some weird side effects to Chemical X, one that doesn't kick in for a long time. Now, you Powerpuffs were good little girls, so the side effect negated the sugar, spice, and everything nice, and you got killer weapons. I think Blossom couldn't mentally handle what she had done, and that's why she went crazy. Expanding on that,
Continued Boomer.
we were bad little boys, so we got powers that were helpful instead of harmful. It makes me wonder what would have happened to Mojo if he had been alive long enough to get affected.
As for why we got the powers the way we did, I think the side effect happened when it was convenient for it, not us.
Said Butch.
Blossom was fighting Mojo, so it appeared out of nowhere to purposely force her to kill him. Same with Buttercup. She was trying to help Professor Utonium, but instead her blades came out and negated her attempted good deed. As for you, you were lucky the squirrel only got scratched. Yours appeared while you were at peace with your animal friend.
Then Boomer's healing power came when he was desperately trying to save me, and saving someone is a good thing.
Said Brick.
I was worrying about you after Boomer told me that you warned him, and I never thought I'd be worrying about a sissy little girl, let alone a Powerpuff Girl, so I started to feel your emotions. Butch got his while wishing pain would go away, and we like to cause pain, not help take it away. We pretty much felt sick to our stomachs at the thought of doing something violent, because all we could see were Blossum and Buttercup's horrible blades, and Butch and Brick bleeding to death.
Boomer said.
So, we just live normal lives, aside for the fact that we still have powers. We don't want to get rid of them, though, and it seems we don't need to.
Bubbles was fighting the urge to cry, and her hand shook as she wrote on her board. "That's not fair," she said.
I agree,
replied Brick sadly.
I mean, we wouldn't want to kill people either, but we'd at least be able to try and keep our heads while trying to fix it. But you girls were so pure.
"I want to go home," said Bubbles, and the boys nodded, Boomer taking her hand.
I'll fly you,
he offered, but Bubbles looked terrified. "I'm scared of flying now," she told him, but he gave a comforting smile.
It's okay,
He reassured her in a soft, kind voice.
you're in safe hands. If you had told me I'd be saying that 10 years ago, I would have said you were on something.
Brick and Butch laughed as well, but just like Boomer's, it showed no sign of happiness. Boomer gently tugged on Bubbles' hand.
Come on, what do you say? It'll be quicker.
She hesitated for a moment, and then gave a very slow nod.
Alrighty, I'll be back soon, guys.
Don't make out!
Butch joked, and Boomer blushed, closing his eyes and growling. He led Bubbles outside, and she hopped up on his back, clinging to his neck as he supported her by locking his own arms under her legs.
Jesus, you're light,
he said before taking flight. Unable to stand being up so high for the first time in a decade, Bubbles rested her head against Boomer's back, shutting her eyes. Little did he know, she had finally started crying. Once in Townsville, Bubbles pointed the directions to the boarding school. He let her off in front of the double doors and gave her a very sad smile.
You'll be okay,
he whispered, and Bubbles' lips quivered.
You know what, sissy little girl? Me and my bros are here for you any time you need us. Hell, you could just leave this freaking school and bunk with us. I know being around a bunch of rowdy boys would probably get on your nerves, but at least you'd have some friends who can relate to you.
Bubbles didn't respond, and Boomer's face fell.
Whatever you choose to do, please smile for me, just once. It doesn't even have to be sometime soon. I just want you to smile for me sometime.
I think I've forgotten how to smile, said Bubbles. This broke Boomer's heart, and he sighed.
We'll keep in touch, okay?
He said, and Bubbles nodded. He gave her a hug and then ruffled her hair before taking to the sky again. Bubbles slowly entered the building and went to her room, sitting in her chair and silently crying again. After hearing what the boys had to say, there was now a new thing eating at her heart. What happened to Bullet? The following weekend, Bubbles went out again, practically running to an area of woods she knew Bullet had looked after. She was wondering how she could communicate to the animals, and she decided she'd try to use drawings. Bubbles slowed to a steady walk when she entered the woods, looking around for any animal who might know Bullet. She spotted a raccoon and hurried over to it. She was still good enough with animals that she was able to approach them without scaring them. Bubbles quickly knelt and drew a squirrel on the board, and the raccoon pointed at a random squirrel sitting on a branch. It wasn't Bullet. She bit her lip and drew lines to indicate flying, but the raccoon gave an annoyed chatter to express frustration. Thinking fast, Bubbles erased the squirrel and drew a gun firing, and then drew an arrow pointing at the bullet. The raccoon looked a little frightened, and this surprised Bubbles. It chirped at the squirrel in the tree, and it came down to join the conversation. In a series of rapid chatter, the raccoon told the squirrel who Bubbles was looking for, and the squirrel's behavior became tense. It looked at Bubbles and gave a single chirp, running off. Understanding, she quickly followed it. There was a clearing where many animals were playing, mostly rabbits, squirrels, and mice, and the squirrel Bubbles had followed started explaining the situation. It became so silent, it was as if someone had turned the volume of the woods off. A mouse came up to Bubbles, starting to squeak to tell her the story. Luckily, she could still understand animals. Apparently, Bullet had been trying to fight a badger that was attacking a family of voles, when she suddenly tore through the badger completely. Confused and shocked, Bullet realized that she was covered in red liquid, and coming out of her wrists and ankles were jagged razors. All of the woodland critters were horrified, unsure of what to do. Bullet panicked, acting much differently than she would normally, and many of the animals approached her to try and tell her it was okay. However, Bullet slaughtered anything that came near her, even bugs. Her eyes had been wide and blank, and she was shaking and twitching. Bigger animals began attempting to apprehend her, for now she was labeled as extremely dangerous, but she was too fast and strong. It took a full-grown male bear to finally catch her, because for some reason she seemed to have forgotten how to fly. The bear came out with many cuts and a missing eye, but he was able to stuff the poor deranged squirrel into a large picnic cooler. Of course, the cooler was made out of plastic, so when Bullet started slashing at the inner wall, the animals knew she'd soon escape. They really didn't want to, but they knew they had to put her to death, for there was no helping her. Before Bullet could dig all the way through the plastic, another, much bigger badger got in an attack stance. On the bear's signal, he threw the cooler lid open, and the badger dove in, immediately using his claws and teeth to tear Bullet to shreds. He himself suffered many wounds as the ill squirrel slashed at his face in defense, but he had won the fight. Bullet was dead. Sad and mourning, they gave Bullet a burial. To their horror, she had been dug up a few days later, probably by a hungry wolf. So is the life of the animal kingdom. When the story ended, Bubbles was crying again. Of course Bullet had gotten the bad side effect. After all, she was a squirrel of good deeds. Not only that, she had quickly lost her mind just like Blossom had, but much sooner. Bubbles assumed it was because a squirrel's brain is much smaller than a human's, even a child. She thanked the animals by giving them a firm nod, and walked back into the city. Instead of going back to the school right away, Bubbles journeyed to her childhood home, which had a large condemned sign on the door. Ignoring it, she went inside. The house was dark, dusty, and reeked of mold and mildew. There were many rats and cockroaches scuttling around the place, feasting on whatever was left of the food that had been rotting away for 10 years. Bubbles ascended the stairs and entered her bedroom. The sun had soaked up the color from their tricolored blanket, so it was now dull and almost gray. Bubbles sat at the end of the bed, where there was still a large bloodstain, and stared at the hotline, almost expecting it to buzz. The clown face itself looked a little melancholy, and she wondered if it was just a trick of the light. Glancing at the nightstand, she saw a picture frame with her, the professor, and her sisters at the beach, all wearing jubilant smiles. Feeling more alone than ever, Bubbles placed her face in her hands and cried. Boomer had told her he wanted to see her smile, but she truly believed she could no longer perform the action. She had the rest of her life ahead of her, a life of emptiness, existing as a mere shell. And so, that day in Mojo Jojo's lair had not been saved, and no day for the next 10 years had been saved. Not another day will ever be saved by the Powerpuff Girls.